When I first received a call from Jamie, it was about 6 years ago, and I remember I was in a car wash, and my phone called and picked it up, and he goes, "Is that Gary?" I said, "Yeah, it is." He said, "It's Jamie here, Durie here," and in my mind I went, "Oh yeah, the garden guy." And he said, "You know, I'm in need of a bit of meditation." I said, "Okay, great." So he came along and he did a course of instruction with me, and since that time we've basically become best of friends. And there's the surface value that you kind of encounter through the popular media, and you get a taste of a person, but you don't get the essence. And throughout the years, I've really gotten a sense of Jamie as a man, and he's far more than meets the eye. Tonight, he's going to share with us his journey thus far. He's the most innately spiritual person I've ever personally met. He's a powerhouse, a force of nature. He doesn't stop, kind of lives on a plane, always travelling. From the moment he wakes up in the morning, I can't keep up with him. He just works into the night, and the same thing goes as a machine. And he's totally inspired my life, and I watch him go into a room and the energy just lifts in a place. And so I thought, all right, it's about time that people got to hear the real story. And so I managed to convince him to come tonight, and he's totally changed his schedule. He's meant to be in Italy, and so he's rearranged his whole life to be here. So I hope you give this beautiful man a warm welcome, this Australian legend, as he comes to the stage. Come on up, Jamie. Thanks, guys.
Hi everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. I'll just plug myself back in again. I must first start by saying I'm incredibly honoured to be here, and I'm incredibly proud of what Gary and his team have put together here. It's quite amazing to be in a room of people who just are on a journey, and I'm on a very similar journey myself. As Gary pointed out, you know, I haven't stopped since I basically hit the ground, and this is a very, very personal journey. It's not one I've ever shown before, actually. But this is a very different room too, and I feel like I can kind of kick my shoes off and hang out with a few old friends. There's a lot of familiar faces here, and I'm going to take you through a bit of a journey and tell you what I got out of my experience pre and post Gary, my little gorgeous guru, and hopefully you can take something away from it. And if not, I think, as my old man says, everyone's got something wise to say. So I'm going to run through this as fast as possible. I have packed quite a bit into my little life. I'll just grab my little buzzer down there, if that's all right. Thank you. And it started really early, about this far ago, actually. You can see that I've always been very, very connected to nature. And in a funny way, when you get involved in media, you kind of got to get something to ground you. And in a way, you look at a lot of these Hollywood celebrities who, you know, get into weird and wonderful different sorts of organisations. And I will embrace anyone that has faith in one or many or something, because I think you've got to get something to ground you and earth you and get you back into your own self again. And for me, connection with the natural world has always done that. And I think from a very, very young age, I was always interested in gardening. I grew up in, I was born here in Sydney, but I actually grew up in the northwest of Australia in a place called Tom Price. My dad was in the mines there, so I was kind of raised on powdered milk and red dirt. And I had a little pet kangaroo and a dingo, and I used to constantly be out. Mum would never, ever get a hold of me. I was out in the bush, building tree houses and all that sort of stuff. And so it sort of started there. It was a bit of a mixture of Sri Lanka and Australia. Most people think I lay in solariums, but actually my mother's Sri Lankan. So but actually that helped me out quite a bit in one of my earlier careers, which we'll touch on tonight. And I hope there's no one, well, they're far too young, so that might work for the kids. But anyway, we'll get to that later on. My mate James Houston will help me out there, which is how actually Gary and I met years ago, and I'm sure there's a few friends of James here. So yes, my mother was born in Galle in Sri Lanka, and I've always felt a very very big connection towards the tropical world, and sort of being raised in Australia. You can see me there in Tom Price, my dad in his gorgeous dressing gown and all that sort of stuff, and me at school. They called me Budgie at school, actually, because I have very, very skinny legs, rather large shoulders, and I used to squawk a lot. And you can see the skinny legs there. It's very, very funny. My mother still is, actually, very beautiful. And you can see her at the top there with my brother and I. And, oh, my God, look at that hair. That's my brother's wedding. How did that get in there? And there's my family. So my mum in Hollywood, holding an Academy Award at some weird and wonderful party. And the funny thing is I left home at a very, very early age. I left home at about the age of 14, which was way, way, way too young for any young boy. And it really wasn't until about 5 or 6 years ago that I learnt the power of good parenting. And when I started to become a little more conscious and I started to reflect back upon my life, and I realised why I'd made some of the decisions I had, I wouldn't change a thing right now because it's made me exactly who I am today. And it's given me the power to move forward. But it's definitely made me a much better parent. And this is where I guess I started work. I started as a model at the age of 15, way too young. And by the age of 16, I was dancing all over the place. I was working in Las Vegas. I joined up with a little dance troupe called the Penthouse Male Review, and then I went into a show that I'm sure some of you may have seen, hopefully not. You certainly may have heard of them, Manpower Australia. And little did I know that tiny little step that I took in, I guess, making the most of what I had at that stage. Not much of it is left now, I can tell you, but it was certainly around back then. Led me on a path to Las Vegas, all over the world. We toured through 14 countries a year. We did 10 shows a week. We worked in some extraordinary countries. I got to live in Japan. I lived in South Africa for a while. I lived in Manila. And all of this was happening before I was even 21. So it was an extremely fast course in, I guess, just the university of life. And so I sort of, that's a little bit over the top, isn't it? My team at the office put this together without me even looking, and that was brave, wasn't it? This isn't gin, by the way, it's water. I'm sure you're all drinking it. So it was a funny world. We started this group not knowing that it would sort of reach a point that we became the most lucrative and the most popular and the biggest entity male dance troupe in the world. We had hundreds and hundreds of employees. We had 4 offices throughout the world. We had, and before I knew it, before I was even 22 years of age, I was managing hundreds of thousands of dollars and hiring and firing guys and training them, and I was very involved in the pyrotechnics and the dance and the choreography and the stage sets. We had 17 different costume changes, would you believe? And so there was a lot behind the scenes that I used to get involved in. But I had no idea what I really wanted to do later on in life. I was just going with what was in my gut, and I'm kind of like, well, this feels good, and it's great fun, and I was making great money. I'm meeting all these people all over the world and having a fantastic time. For a 21-year-old boy, this was a dream come true, I can tell you, boys. So I had a fantastic time. And this is my daughter, Taylor. The next phase of my life, my next chapter of my life, a very beautiful one. So at about the age of 23, 21, I met a beautiful Californian girl because we were the first Australian cabaret act to ever get a residency on Las Vegas Boulevard. And I met this beautiful Californian girl, and about 3 years after that, we had gorgeous Taylor. I think she was made somewhere in Florence after a couple of bottles of Chianti. And she's been the light of my life, and we've become best friends because actually we kind of grew up together. Yeah. This is us in India, my brother and I, and my brother's kid. And we've toured a lot through Asia. I've taken her with me on a lot of my journeys. Obviously, little bits and pieces in the press. You know, you've got to accept, I think, when you're in the media, to be able to just put it all out there. And sometimes you've also got to accept that they may say what they want to say about you, and you have absolutely no control over that. You are judged, you are trialed, and you are convicted before you even got a chance to read the morning paper. And it's a small price to pay, because I think when you're in the media eye, you get the chance to, you get a lot of likes and perks, you know, and so I've always believed in kind of just putting it out there and just being as open as possible and telling people about my life. This is the two of us just last year in my house in Los Angeles. And you know, part of the reason I went to the US 4 or 5 years ago was just to get closer to my daughter, because I felt that that's something I missed out on when I was 14, 15, 16. You know, I was off in Las Vegas and doing all sorts of things. And my daughter was, you know, 13 at the time and certainly needed a father around. Unfortunately, her mother and I separated when she was about 2 or 3, for reasons beyond my control at that point. But it wasn't until later on that I kind of worked out that actually I did play a small part in that. And it was through being more conscious, I think, that helped me realise, well, you have put a lot of energy into your career, Jamie, and sometimes you put your personal life aside. And sometimes you pay the consequences for that. And so I've learned to take responsibility for those. And it's been incredibly cleansing. But my daughter and I just have a ball. We spend weekends together now. We're best of mates. This is her just last month. Doesn't she look like Nelly Furtado? Who I just love. This was her at her prom just last month. Yes, she's only 18. Scary, right? So my daughter was definitely a big chapter in my life. But then, you know, as I went through that whole manpower phase and, you know, 10 shows a week, dark on Mondays, 42 backflips a night, and my back is feeling every bit of it right now. I got to a point where I was about 24, 25 years old, and I'm kind of like, you know what? I'm sick of using this and this to make a living. I actually want to start using this. And I could feel my brain just going to mush. I mean, although I was using it very creatively, because I was involved in the stage and the set design and the lightings and the pyrotechnics and all the costumes, and all that was keeping me creatively stimulated, I felt like I really had more to offer. And I felt like if I just had a better education, if I'd had a shot at that early on in life, I'd be able to put all this beautiful creative energy into something that was extremely positive, not just for me, but for those around me, for the community, and also for the environment. And that's been one of my biggest passions for the last 15 years. But it was through a lot of these sorts of people, Andy Goldsworthy, who started, and I started seeing his work in Europe. Look at this guy. Isn't that incredible? Is anyone familiar with Andy Goldsworthy's work? Absolutely mind-blowing stuff. And you know, a lot of architects and friends of mine follow his work. Jeffrey Bawa, I did a documentary in Sri Lanka and got to visit my mum's house and travelled over there and met one of my greatest mentors, Jeffrey Bawa, actually just before he passed away. He was a lawyer until the age of 36. And then, of course, he just decided to become one of the world's best architects, and studied architecture, went on to design Government House in Sri Lanka, and probably about 50 or 60 of the world's greatest resorts, the Trident Hotel, the Lighthouse Hotel. He was really, I think, the pioneer of what I affectionately call the outdoor room. And a lot of his design philosophies I use on a daily basis, purely because he was the expert at melding the outdoors with the in and making people feel like there was actually no segregation between indoors and out. And that's the way in the tropical world and here in Australia we want to live. Mark Newson, an incredible man. What work he has created and the journey that he's been on, and I've followed his exhibitions in Paris and in New York, and throughout my travels I've always followed his work, and he's been one of my greatest mentors. And I've since developed, an industrial design business, and now we develop a whole range of furniture, which we're exhibiting in Paris in April, and it was really through meeting people like this that it kind of urged me to start exploring that part of my creativity. So I guess that was another part of what I'd learnt through Gary's teachings, and becoming slightly more conscious, or at least 10% of the way. I have a long journey to go, as we all do, I think. I don't think we ever stop learning. But I think what I did was I looked back upon, who my mentors were, and I then found reasons and turning points within my career that related back to my mentors. And I thought, wow, how amazing that I just met that person at that point in my life, and then I went on to create this, and this, and if I hadn't met them, it's just, and I'm sure you've all had that aha experience where you've been in the same situation. So I went back to school, which was kind of weird, because going from Las Vegas dancing and taking most of your clothes off, not all of them, I will say, and then deciding that you want to go back to school and study was kind of a weird thing. Because I went back to college and I thought, well, what do I really want to do? And a friend of mine and I were having a conversation. He's like, well, you definitely don't need to do another calendar, Jamie. I think you've done enough of that. I'm like, yeah, you're probably right. So I'm like, well, I really love, working in the garden. My mum's a passionate gardener. I don't think I realised the seeds my mum had planted in me earlier on in life when I was gardening with her really weren't able to germinate later on until I had the education and the ability to actually put that stuff in place. And so following my passions was definitely something that was a very big part in my career. So I started this business back in 1998, and since then we've employed almost 260 staff globally. And we have had offices in Dubai, Singapore, Hong Kong, Melbourne, Adelaide, Sydney, and I turned this thing into an absolute beast. And it was about 2 years into it that I thought, my God, how am I going to control this thing? It's just like absolutely taking off, because back then, landscape design was sort of not really that well known. And then, you attach the fact that you've got this ex-calendar boy who's suddenly become a landscape designer, and I'm designing all the lower North Shore housewives' homes and servicing them with gardens, of course, and the career just sort of woof, went off. And before too long, I started, some of my work started getting published in Belle and Vogue and all that sort of thing. I'm like, okay, well, this is working, good. But I used to constantly work, and during that period, I was constantly putting my life, my personal life, on hold. I'm like, you know what? I've just got to get this done, and if I can just get this done, I can show mum and dad that I really didn't make the right choice. I did make the right choice, and I've ended up here, and so I was on this constant full-on achievement snowball, like how many more things can I do? How many more things can I achieve? And I hadn't actually stopped at this point. I was still 26 when I went back to school, 27, and studied horticulture and landscape architecture for a few years, and we learnt 3,786 plants, and I used to stick all the botanical names to the fridge and all over the house so your mind would take a picture of it, and I think that was actually one of the best tools I had to kind of start remembering all these botanical names. And then working globally with that amount of species in your head, I remember saying to Mum, I'm like, how do I kind of put all this into place? I can see the whole thing. I can walk into a space and I can see the whole thing designed within 30 seconds. I've always had that ability. But prior to me studying, I couldn't keep a plant alive to save myself. So I'm like, I've got to get back to school and study about plants and horticulture and all that and sort of move on. So I started this business, and it was a little shop in Lower North Shore, and then I got a tap on the door from a guy who said, mate, we've got this TV show. It's fantastic. We send them away for a weekend. They sip cocktails, you create the garden, and then you come back and you surprise. I'm like, whoa. I'm a qualified horticulturalist. It takes years to build an established garden. How much did you say? And my kind of TV career took off after that. So, but it was important that I started this prior to TV, and I never ever let it go. For as much heartache that it was, and taking all the phone calls while I was on set and trying to juggle the two things and firing staff, it was a mad life. I mean, if anyone could actually keep up with me and stay with me, I'd give them a medal. It was really, I made absolutely no room for my private life and just kept, getting this thing forward and forward. And, we did lots of lovely staff retreats. In fact, Gary, you would remember this one. You came and did a little talk for us, which brought most of us to tears. It was absolutely beautiful. And our staff will never forget it. And so we've had lots of really amazing moments. And then, of course, went into television and started off with the lovely Backyard Blitz, which went on for about 8 years. And it was so much fun because it was just four mates hanging out, creating gardens for people for free, people who needed them, not people who wanted them, because for the last 4 or 5 years I've been creating gardens for the Lower North Shore housewives who are like, oh, just put that there, I'm going to get another pretty boy to go and do this. But actually this was something that was really very much from the heart. And we would sit down at the table, we would read these letters, and we're like, oh my God, these people really, really need this. And it was a great thing. So, 360 gardens later, and more than 7 series, and a Logie Award for every single year that we were on air, because I think people were not just attracted to our gardens, or not just attracted to the fact that we just joke around and have this fantastic time on camera, but I think they were most attracted to the emotional connection and the emotional change and what happened when we actually brought people back into their own spaces and completely transformed their lives and created what I like to call the sanctuary, the outdoor room, this beautiful environment where they can be themselves, where they can be connected to nature. And from the very, very first start of my business, I've always said our mantra is connecting people with plants, because I believe we are all intrinsically connected to plants in some way, shape or form. And if you can find a vehicle to let them stay a while, not that I was doing it myself at the time, but if they can sit and smell the roses and you can create all this architecture and design around plants, then you're actually forming a greater connection to plants. So that was my philosophy, just trying to create these zones. My mate Scotty Cam and I had a great time. He's turning 50 in a couple of weeks, so we're getting on now. It's going to be very funny, his little birthday. But Backyard Blitz was definitely a phenomenon, and it really gave me a great head start into television. And since then, would you believe I've done 52 primetime shows between Australia and the US. It's been absolutely exhausting. But I wouldn't change a moment, because it was so much fun. And it's actually given me an amazing ability to be able to spread some of these philosophies and get people to actually have more confidence in their landscape and actually, start to nurture nature a little bit. And you'd be surprised how many kids have been inspired to become gardeners or landscape designers or landscape architects or designers, for instance. Anyone who's passionate about the environment now in this Gen X and Gen Y, I think is a positive thing, because they will go on to be great custodians of our planet. And anything I could infuse into these guys was super, super important. I wanted to make sure that we were leaving behind a huge, huge legacy with every child that we touched. And we used to actually think about the way we would structure these programs, so we were making sure that they were kid-friendly and we had a massive child following. Cirque du Soleil was another great passion of mine, and for any of you who've ever been to Las Vegas and seen the residency shows there, they're absolutely mind-blowing. I think that was a very big creative evolution for me, and seeing all that theatre and art on stage, and then taking plants and turning it into what I remember as being the most inspirational vision on stage I'd ever seen, was a really fun thing to do. And I think, the more exposure you can get to experiences like that, the better. After a while, after much controversy, I moved to Channel 7. I'm probably the only talent, I think, in the history of Australian television who dropped $1 million to go to the opposition. But I did it for a reason, because I believed that having done 16 or 17 primetime shows at that point, I thought, okay, I think we've got something here, and I want to actually create something myself. And I created this format that I felt was the ideal piece of television. I wanted to educate people. I wanted to inspire people. We don't all constantly live in the garden. We've all got mouths. We eat. We love to travel. We love to do all these different things. So I created a show called The Outdoor Room, which basically travelled, and then we did the garden makeover that had the emotional connection to the people we were giving the gardens to, and then of course they'd come back and they would sit down with a gorgeous chef who would cook a beautiful meal and sit down, and we'd enjoy that space, and you would see the emotional connection that they've got to that space. I couldn't get anyone to believe in it. So I left and I went to the opposition. And I paid the price at that point, but I nurtured a new career in the US, which I've never, ever been able to look back on and say, that was a bad decision. That was one of the greatest decisions I ever did, because I backed myself. I believed that we had something special. I did the homework. I trained. I felt like it was something that I wanted to do. And obviously the block and shows like that did help me catapult myself to a pedestal where I could then bounce into other areas and start to learn some of those crafts that I had learnt. maybe not those crafts, but a few others. Great fun. And then recently Top Design and all those sorts of TV shows. Travel has been one of my greatest teachers. I think from a very young age I've always loved to travel, and the more that I could absorb through some of these beautiful countries and these amazing people that I've met, the better designer I thought I might be, but most importantly, the better human being I thought I would be. And I didn't even know it back then, but actually I was learning more about myself by traveling through these countries than learning through design and so forth. I think it just became the vehicle that then led me to these places. The Arctic was an incredible experience. I don't know why I dived under the ice at that stage. I think that was the craziest thing I've ever done. This ice was supposed to be 3 feet deep. And I went over to the executive producer and I said, what about we just get a shot, straight on, and we just, show how thin the ice is. It's only 3 feet deep here. And, this is in the Arctic, and at that stage, climate change was something that people thought, well, yeah, maybe, but maybe it's just cyclic, or maybe this is just, a small pattern. So I started, stomping my foot down like this, and I'm like, bang, straight through the ice, and it was literally only 3 inches deep. And scientists had studied in that area of Hudson Bay up in the Arctic only 2 years prior to us, and it was supposed to be 3 foot deep. So it's escalating far greater than we had ever thought. And some of the storms that we've experienced recently are a testament to that. Travelling through Asia, that's a great look, isn't it? Fantastic. Working in Egypt for a little while was a great experience. London, of course, and the travel has just gone on and on and on. Japan, I felt one of my greatest design connections. Mexico was amazing, their spiritualism. Asia. I think a lot of these spaces have been inspired by the places that I've been to, because I learn about the way that they live their lives, and then I convert them into what I think our society want to achieve in terms of architecture or design, and turn them into spaces. This is something that I learned in Manila, would you believe? I went to a restaurant in the Philippines, which was a long bamboo table, and it sat in this riverbed, and the Brooklyn sort of river was running beneath you, and you take your shoes off, and then you sit around the table, and there's 20 of you all having this amazing banquet with this beautiful water running through your feet. And it was the most incredible experience, and it really brought the entire table together. And this was a table of strangers, and the conversation that came out of that one dinner I thought was amazing. So I created this and thought, well, if we can do the same thing in Santa Monica, why not? And this was for 3 single ladies who absolutely love to socialise and have dinner parties and all that sort of stuff. And this was a New York-inspired garden, making the most of vertical spaces, and putting a lot of those things that I'd learnt through my travels into design. And bear in mind, all these gardens that you're looking at were all created in 3 days. Don't try this at home. Beautiful French garden inspired by the lovely Patrick Blanc, a great friend of mine from Paris, who is the greatest pioneer of vertical gardens. And I think that's been one of the greatest trends in landscape design over the last 10, 12 years. New Zealand, and working with Gabion and sustainable materials. Rooftop gardens in the city rooftops that can be modified so you allow people to become the designer. Resorts in Pink Tartar in Broome, where we dealt with more of an outback theme of planting rather than your typical tropical resort. Sustainable developments like lifestyle working, where there's a boardroom that's actually full of surfboards, and there's indoor-outdoor areas where people have a greater connection to nature, and that lifestyle working model actually has now been replicated in 6 countries. Because the productivity of the staff that sit within those dwellings, because they're connected to nature, it's untold. The difference between the productivities is quite amazing. Sheridan Salobre was one of the first resorts I did about 9 years ago. And we came up with this Gabion basket system because I couldn't stand the fact that they were exploding the hell out of this mountain, and all of this beautiful native species, this Euphorbia canariensis, which is one of my favourite plants, the candelabra cacti, you might call it. which became the logo for the resort later on, was being completely pulled away. And so what I wanted to do was come up with a way of embracing the natural rock, putting it into a beautiful, elegant basket, which we made out of steel, and then we turned that into these lovely baskets, which I've then used in all sorts of gardens all over the world. Celebrity gardens, domestic gardens, resort gardens on Hamilton Island. Hayman Island we did just recently, and here we're using the Gabion basket system again. And it was just a way of embracing nature and looking at what surrounds us. This was our largest environmental project in Dubai, where it was a $2.4 billion master plan, and we had to create an entire nursery just to service this area. But because it was so sandy, we developed all sorts of systems for irrigation where we'd get a higher yield of plants. A 5-story high vertical garden that we recently did in Melbourne. And the buildings, of course, sold much faster because there was this great connection to nature. Small courtyards that can be converted into different spaces. And my home in Los Angeles, which it really is my sanctuary. I've just recently moved back home here to Australia, but haven't let go of this yet, and we'll need to spend a couple of months a year there. But it was my first big garden after 10 years of building gardens for other people. So it was a great way of kind of getting involved and turning my bedroom into literally an indoor-outdoor space where the walls, opened up into these outdoor spaces. I think that connection to nature has always led me to become more grounded, I guess. This is a Chelsea flower show in London, in New York, and I got to meet her Madge, and she loves Kimberley sandstone in Australia. And we had a 10-minute conversation about it. And then, of course, Prince Philip came up and said, "I do love your tree fern. It's lovely." And I said, "I'm terribly sorry, but it's not actually a tree fern. It's a member of the cycad family. It's a Macrozamia murrea." And he goes, "I didn't come here for a bloody lesson." And he walks off like this in front of about, I don't know, it must have been 60 press. And of course, it hit the front page of the paper every morning. Next morning, it was like, my publicist was like, "Yes, Jamie." I'm like, "No, I just offended royalty. I'll never be allowed back in the country." But it was a great experience, and meeting these people has definitely changed my life. This garden cost $980,000 and was up for 5 days. And then, of course, every piece had to be bubble wrapped and taken back to Australia. And lots of exhibition gardens since. And then, kind of leading on to the next phase of my life, which was, starting to talk about some of the skills that I'd learnt from those around me, and putting those into written word, where we could start to pass those on to other people and create a business around my passion, which I'm very, very lucky to be able to do, and not a lot of people can do that. A lot of people spend time working in jobs that they're not actually very passionate about, and then they find another way to make money elsewhere, or they find another way to keep their creativity going in areas that, in the small amount of space that they have outside these jobs that they just hate. I'm lucky enough to work in something that I absolutely love, so it never feels like work to me. And so we've gone on and on and on and on. But as I said, all the while putting a lot of my personal stuff aside. And creating these products was another great way of us allowing people to get a greater connection to their outdoor spaces, feeling like we were luxuriating them in the outdoors, and creating luxurious furniture for resorts and hotels that were bespoke, where they were connected to plants, and dealing with lots of forms of nature to infuse into our designs. And just about everything we touch has a greater connection to nature. And this was another big turning point in my career. It was really just taking on board my passion for the environment and being able to materialise that based on the career that I'd enjoyed through television, and the voice that I'd been so privileged to be given through that television career. And I got the chance to interview His Holiness the Dalai Lama through being trained with the Australian Conservation Foundation and Al Gore's group, the Climate Reality Project, it's now called. It was called the Climate Change Project back then. And we're required to do 10 seminars a year for free using his slideshow, a very dynamic man who could just talk with so much passion about the environment, you walk out crying. And I got to interview him, and I said to Dalai Lama, I said, what would you say to world leaders who put money issues before the environment? And he said, it's really just love, lack of love for our planet. And a lot of his answers were like that. He was an incredibly amazing man to meet. And then I started mixing the two passions together, which was my environment, my passion for the environment, and television, which was a great experience also, and turning that into a lot of humanitarian work and those sorts of things. I think that most of these have been led by my energy and my passion for what I do. And I think if you can catch someone in the moment of creating something that they're really, really passionate about, it becomes entertaining because they're not actually being an actor. They're not actually sitting there and saying, well, I'm playing a part here. You're just catching me in the moment doing something I really bloody love. And that, to me, is entertaining. That's good television. And that's why I'll continue to do what I do. And I think for the most part, it's been an incredible experience to be able to use these skills back home and be awarded for them in some of the different areas. This is the first time my mum and dad have been in the same room for 20 years. Just recently I received a Medal of the Order of Australia for service to the environment and community and different charities and so forth. And that was a great day. But it was not until I really started to look back upon some of my experiences based on some of what I'd learnt, I guess, through meditation. And meditation has given me the space to sit down and go, well, what is it I'm really doing here? And why have I got this insatiable energy? And why am I so bloody ambitious? And why am I constantly on this achieve train? And so after I started to meditate, when I was forcing myself to just take that 20 minutes during the day, during the morning, and then 20 minutes at night, I gave myself the ability to get to have that space, to really get clear, to think about what I'd been doing in the past and this roller coaster that I'd been on and what it really meant to me. And suddenly life started slowing down. And suddenly my personal life started coming back in. And then the balance started coming back into my life. And I'm like, wow, I wish I'd done this like 15 years ago because I may have been sitting in a very different area right now. But the fact that I didn't, I guess I've been able to do a few really interesting things. Like a bit of gardening. This was me this morning at about 10 o'clock, loading one of my favourite trees into my front yard with my old mate Nigel and moving back into my dream house, which I've been building for the last 4 or 5 years. So every day is a new day. My view from the bedroom, looking out across the ocean, and I wake up in the morning and allow that sun to wake me up and get into my eyes. And I thought, so well, now's my time to take my 20 minutes and actually just go, hey, what's tomorrow, and what does that mean to me, and what has the last 25 years really meant? Thank you.
Got one question. So we've run out of question time. So rather than pass the mic around, I'm going to ask the question. What is it if you had
You got to sweat when the guru like him wants to throw one of these at you publicly.
If you had to condense all your life's learning down into one thing, what's the most important thing that people in this room could apply to their own personal lives?
Well, it's a very tough question to answer, but I think never stop educating yourself. Never stop absorbing love from those around you. Keep a really strong connection to nature, and pass on everything that you've absorbed, so that our children and their children's children can learn from what we've experienced.
Right. Thanks, mate. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right.